Okay, you are listening to the Philadelphia Hall Monitor on WPPM 106.5 in Philadelphia, Comcast Channel 66, and streaming live at phillycam.com. You can find us on Twitter at Hall Monitor WPPM, on our website www.hallmonitor.org, or on Facebook at PHWWPPM. Tonight on the program, we will be joined by Councilmember Catherine Gilmore Richardson to discuss her recent unclaimed property legislation and the upcoming budget hearings. And Lisa Haver will be with us, Lisa Haver of the Alliance of Philadelphia Public Schools, to discuss the impending hiring of the new superintendent of the Philadelphia School District. And as always, we are here with Denise Clay Murray. Denise, how are you today?
I'm good. How are you?
I'm fine, thank you. There's a lot to talk about tonight, and a lot going on in local government and Philadelphia politics and politics in general. So, with that said, we're going to start off with our interview with Councilmember Catherine Gilmore Richardson. Okay, we are here on WPPM 106.5 in Philadelphia with Councilmember Catherine Gilmore Richardson. Councilmember, thank you so much for being with us.
Thank you. Thank you so much for having me.
So the first thing I'd like to ask you about, you sponsored a bill last week that relates to unclaimed property. And this is something that individuals in Pennsylvania can do. The state has a database, the State Department, and you can go put your name in and see what happens if you are owed something. But I didn't realize that the city could also do that. So can you tell us a little bit about this bill?
Sure. So a constituent brought to my attention that the city, like so many other individuals in our city, has a number of unclaimed property lines with the Department of Treasury in Pennsylvania. And so I was really intrigued and did a little research and found that there were over 250 claims that we could see that are listed on the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania Department of Treasury website. And that's their online search database. And 250 claims is actually the maximum amount of claims you can actually see online. So it could be more. We don't know how many more, but we were able to see at least 250. And what happens on the website is you'll see that the claims are either under $100 or over $100. And so you don't know whether it's $1,000 or $100,000. And so what we're seeking to do with this legislation is create a process that will require the Director of Finance in the city of Philadelphia to submit an annual report, not only to City Council, but to the city controller, so that we understand how many claims we have with the state, how much the claims are, and has the process started to get those claims and that revenue back to the city of Philadelphia. And so we don't even have a picture of the entirety of how much the amount is. And we're working with the Treasury Department to understand that right now. We understand the process takes some time when you're dealing with a city, and that process has to include the city treasurer. So really, we just wanted to put something, in law, so that we have a process to come up with all of the revenue that we are missing that's just sitting in the state's Department of Treasury. And that's what this bill seeks to do, for us to be able to know how many claims we have, how much it is, and if we're in the process of reclaiming our money.
It's so interesting. It really could be anything, right? At this point, you're not 100% sure what any of these items are.
No, and so it could be revenue, it could be actual property items, but there are a number of claims, as I stated, at least 250, and we need to understand the full scope of all of those claims.
And the impetus for this idea came from a constituent.
Yes, who just casually mentioned it. And, I've searched the database 1 trillion times, because sometimes we'll get calls of individuals saying, oh, I heard a commercial on the radio, or I saw something about, unclaimed property. Is this a thing? Is it real? We would help them, at least print off and send them the paperwork. And even I've found a claim on there, for my parents as well. But I never imagined that the city would have over 250 claims for revenue that could come back to the city of Philadelphia. And so this bill seeks to create a process to ensure that we are getting all of the revenue back to the general fund and all of our property back to the city.
It's really interesting, but it is going to be a while before we know what's there, because the legislation has to be passed and then implemented.
Absolutely. So we're moving into the hearing phase. As of this moment, the bill was referred to the Finance Committee, which is chaired by my colleague, Councilmember Derek Green. And we'll work with him to get a meeting scheduled, a hearing scheduled, and to move forward in the process.
Okay. Well, we'll be watching that with interest. It's a very unique and very interesting kind of thing.
No, particularly,
and
I'm sorry to say this, but particularly in this environment,
Yes.
recognizing that we're in this sort of post-COVID-19 recovery period, we're seeking to ensure that all revenue that is supposed to come into the general fund is actually happening, so that it can help us with any potential anticipated revenue shortages within our wage tax fees. As we know, a lot of individuals are still working from home. And so this is a moment where we have to ensure that all the revenue we are owed is coming back to the city and helpful to our bottom line in the general fund. And even with, helping us with ensuring that we're at the GFOA's recommended level for a rainy day fund, which we are grossly under. And so even if it could help us in that regard, every little bit helps.
Yeah, and I think the recommendation is about 17% of the budget, and we're probably 4 or 5%, maybe 6.
And projected to be, significantly off from where the bond rating agencies would like us to be as a municipality, and obviously the GFOA. And so it does impact our ability to borrow and the ratings that we have. So we have to do all we can to get in as much revenue as possible.
Right. So I'd like to switch gears a little bit, and one of our major focuses for the next couple months is going to be budget. So the budget hearings are coming up. What are some of the things that you're going to be keeping an eye on?
Sure. So for our upcoming budget, I think some of the areas that I'll continue to focus on are some of the things that I've worked on in council over the last couple of years. And I'll say first and foremost, workforce development. It is something that I've worked on from the first bills that I introduced in council that I'm still actively working on till all of the programmatic initiatives we were able to do through the new normal budget process, with creating a upskilling program for home health aides to move into jobs as certified nursing assistants. Workforce development has really been a centerpiece of the work I've tried to focus on, down to apprenticeship programs. And so I'll be looking very closely again at the Commerce Department, particularly with the workforce development side. In the very first budget, when I first entered into council as a council member, the Workforce Development Department was eliminated from the city budget. And so we ensured going into 21 that we would have a workforce development unit in the Commerce Department. And so now we're just trying to expand those efforts out. So I'll be focusing on workforce development. Obviously, as the chair of Council's Committee on the Environment, I'll again have a special focus on the environment and sustainability, and supporting the Office of Sustainability, the work that they do, PEA, and some of our other city related agencies. Last year, we focused on ensuring we could get the Environmental Justice Advisory Commission up and running, and through the budget process was able to get $206,000 for the Office of Sustainability, $103,000 for staffing, and then another $103,000 to help with some of the studies that would need to be done, and some of the community-centered conversations and work that we need to do around environmental justice. And so the EJAC Commission was just announced. Environmental Justice Advisory Commission, they were announced, all 17 members, just a couple of weeks ago, and we're looking forward to the work they're going to continue to do. Obviously, I'm going to continue to work with our Register of Wills, Tracy Gordon, and our Records Commissioner, Leonard, on the Tangled Title issue, which I think is one of the most significant housing challenges we're facing in the city. Last budget cycle, I worked really, really closely with our council president to ensure that out of the MPI initiative, we had support for Tangled Titles and Deeds, and I'm so happy that we have $7.6 million over the next 4 years to help more families resolve tangled titles or deeds. And it'll really quadruple the investment the city was able to make year over year for the next 4 years. And so for this budget cycle, I'm going to continue to focus on the tangled title work. I'm working with the legal aid agencies and organizations that work through the Department of Planning to ensure that they're adequately staffed and resourced to help all of the families we have identified. It's over 10,400 tangled titles in the city that we can actually find. And then also through this process, I'll be working with some of our departments to look at the regulations around individuals who live in homes with tangled titles and deeds, so we can ensure that they are eligible for some city services that right now they can't access because the home is not in their name. And in fact, we'll probably have an announcement about that the 1st of May. We're going to work through that in the budget process. And then, of course, and I know this is a lot, but I try to do as much as we can on the issues we care about. But I'll be working with L&I very closely in the Nuisance Business Task Force. We have an unfortunate proliferation of drug paraphernalia stores in the city of Philadelphia. They are popping up like popcorn. And not that we are against commerce and not that we are against individuals opening businesses, but we have seen a number of stores selling drug paraphernalia, and they do not have the proper licenses and community approval to open up stores selling drug paraphernalia. And so I am going to work with L&I and with PPD and have been working with them, but want to work more closely in this budget process to identify the resources necessary for us to do enforcement on these stores selling drug paraphernalia. We need additional inspectors for L&I. We need additional support for the Nuisance Business Task Force for PPD, and I'm going to be working on that part of the process for these drug paraphernalia stores. Last year, we were doing ad hoc little tours of certain areas and certain council districts. And I will tell you, it was some of the hardest work I've done and things I've seen in a very long time. I mean, we would go out after sundown to visit these stores, and most of the stores we went to that had violations either had to be seized or we needed to ensure they had the proper certification or licensure. And so we're going to continue that work. Obviously, working with my colleague, Councilmember Thomas, we're going to continue to support arts and culture, illuminate the arts in the African American History Museum and the African American Museum of Philadelphia. They've been a budget focus of mine since year one when they were zeroed out of the budget, and we ensured that they stayed as a part of a line item budget for the city. And lastly, the community evening resource centers. I did update the curfew legislation so it's easier for it to be enforced, but as a part of that process, we've now opened two what we call community evening resource centers. Formerly, they were known as curfew centers. And one is open in South Division, which is at Dixon House on South 20th Street. We have another one at Church of Christian Compassion in Southwest. And we're looking to expand that model to North and Northwest Philadelphia, and then work with my colleague on the Center and East Division. So I'm hopeful that at the end of this budget process, instead of having two community evening resource centers, we'll have 5. And that's the goal. So that's some of the things that I'll be focusing on and working really hard towards during this budget cycle.
So I have a 1-year-old, and the budget books that are issued are taller than he is when he stands up, and there's multiple volumes of them. How do you approach the budget here? And so all that data, and there's so much that happens. How do you prepare, and how do you identify issues in the budget that you then take to these hearings?
So the first thing I'll say is you have to have a team. There is no I in team, and it is no possible way to read every single page of the budget books unless you were reading from sunup to sundown every single day for weeks on end. And I can say that as a former legislative aide, as someone who would take those tall binders home, and I would sit out on my porch on the weekends and literally just like read every line every single day for the weekend, just to prepare for the next week. And so one, there's no I in team, so we have to, have the team looking through, certain sections that we really want to focus on. And a lot of times, and my old chief of staff, David Ford, taught me this, is not what you see, is sometimes and most times is what you don't see are the things that you have to ask questions about in the budget process. So really, I'll be focusing on specific departments and looking very methodically at every single line in their budget. And that goes to, line items that are, historically or traditionally included, to new line items. I'll be looking at every single class to see how, their employee structure will change over time and what they are forecasting for their particular department. I'm going to look at everything because it's important that we understand what's happening at a granular level within our city government, because that's a part of the work holistically that we have to do as members of council, is really look at areas of prioritization and focus and drill in on them and go from there. So that's what I'll be doing.
One other thing I wanted to ask you about, you are chair of the environmental committee, and your mentor was also chair of the environmental committee. What are some of the key goals that you've set for yourself and set for that committee from your time as a staffer and now as the chair of that committee?
Sure. Well, one thing I'll say is, as a former clerk to that committee, I learned a whole bunch about how we've been able to move the needle forward, and whether that was from the lead bill, whether that was the lead bill, whether it was working on energy benchmarking in both iterations for our city building stock. I learned a whole bunch. But one thing I learned and heard from a number of the sort of environment committee organizations, activists that are involved in the process, is that they wanted to feel as if they had more of a role in the process. And so after our Earth Day meeting in 2020, and it was like 100 of us on the Zoom because it was 2020, and they told me that they wanted to figure out a process to sort of have regular interaction with the committee. And so we created a civilian environmental council of organizations, 61 total. We split them into 7 different groups and met with them on a monthly basis. And after a while, they said, okay, we can do quarterly because we were meeting every single month with 61 different organizations. And it has helped tremendously with the type of legislation we've been able to offer and work on, and even to the legislation we did with the pension board around ESG and goals around what the pension board could do to ensure that the environment, sustainability, and climate change were included in investment decisions and some of the positions that the city would take around our investments. Even it was helpful to have them involved in that process. And so the first thing we tried to do is be more community centered and listen more to the organizations, who are involved in this work. And I'll be honest, I tell them a lot, it's not a lot of people on these meetings that look like me. And so the goal is to ensure that we can be more inclusive of individuals who may not be able to join every meeting, may not know about all of the meetings, may not, fully understand and or be aware of how the environment, sustainability, and climate change is impacting their everyday life. And so for me, that is, I would say, the biggest goal that we're going to continue to work on over the next couple of months and going into the remainder of this year, which is something we worked on for the past couple of years, to be community-centered and inclusive from the perspective of the Committee on Environment. And then also from that work we've been doing, I was able to be a member of the Local Government Advisory Committee for the US EPA. And that has really, really transformed my thinking around how we need to approach a number of issues. And I know that we'll be able to have significant impact on the work that we're doing here in the city. And we're working now even with the health department and air management services on moving the needle around air quality issues in Philly, because we know that a number of our families suffer with asthma, particularly in our underserved communities, based on our built environment, and even thinking about how we, move forward and how we don't, sort of reharm the communities that have just been so harmed because we've done things in the past that have been detrimental to their community environments. And that's even from redlining to splitting communities with highways like, Nicetown. We have to ensure that we are doing all we can for those communities. And that's the work that I'm able to do as the chair, but also on the LGAC. And that has been wonderful because I'm the only elected official from Philadelphia, the only one from Pennsylvania, sort of representing the issues of the city and the Commonwealth at a national level. And so I'm on the Environmental Justice Committee with that group, and I vice chair that committee with Mayor Dina Holiday Ingram from East Point, Georgia. And we've been able to give a number of recommendations on just how the EPA is scoring cities, how we want to ensure that municipalities understand that the Biden administration has a focus on ensuring 40% of all the dollars that are expended for efforts from EPA go to traditionally underserved communities, down to further understanding, tree canopy and in Philly, urban tree canopy. And so it's just been wonderful to work on those type of issues. And I look forward to the continued work we're going to do there. And then on the back to the city level, we're hoping to have hearings soon on building decarbonization in our circular economy and how we think about waste and waste management in the future moving forward. And so I already introduced that resolution. That was back in June of last year. And so we're looking to have the hearings in the Committee of Licenses and Inspections coming soon. So we have a lot of work to do, and the journey definitely continues.
Okay. Well, I'd like to bring in Denise Clay Murray here on WPPM 106.5.
Hi, Councilwoman. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you for having me, Denise.
Now, you mentioned that as part of your discussions with the National EPA, as part of this committee, that one of the things that was discussed was the highways that have cut communities in half and have caused people to sometimes have to take a hazardous street crossing to go visit their neighbors. Is there anything that council is discussing regarding that now? I went to a hearing last fall where Congressman Dwight Evans and Congresswoman Lisa Blunt Rochester of Delaware were talking about that. Has council started having those discussions as well?
And so I will say that I think we're all, that particular issue around around roads and highways, that's more of a federal issue. But I think what we're parsing from that is environmental justice and how we all are now thinking about environmental justice and what that means to communities. How do we work to right these wrongs that have been done within our built environment, but thinking about environmental justice in a new way? How are we looking at all of these communities that may not have a tree-lined street and how that impacts what is going on in those communities? Because we found, that a number of communities that have no tree canopy, they are also overlapping with the same communities that have issues with violence and increased violence in those areas. Just from the temperature, being much higher in a certain area than it is in another area because of decreased or increased tree canopy. So I think it's making sure that environmental justice is not just two words we're using because, hey, it's environmental justice and it's environmental month, but that is actually engaging the communities that have been most impacted by the challenges, we know that have gone on in the past, but ensuring that as we move forward, that we're not just saying we're working on environmental justice, or I'll use this word because this is used in the budget process a lot, equity in all we do, because equity and equality are two different things. So ensuring that we are, having community-centered conversations and feedback, and then implementing the recommendations directly from the community, and not just checking off a box to say, oh, we did environmental justice. Look, we have equity. It's wonderful. And you haven't really talked to the community. That's what we're trying to parse down on with environmental justice now. And I think that's what they were seeking to get to in that conversation.
Now, and you make a good point about violence and how the environment kind of fosters it, and in some ways. Is there anything that council is looking to do on that? Because I know that last year they had the peace budget, and that was focused more on the problem of gun violence itself. Are there any discussions you all are having that are looking at the causes of gun violence and not just the problem of gun violence itself?
And apologies for the delay. I think it's important that we look at all of the root causes, and we know what they are, but what are we going to do to make a difference about it? And so for me, as somebody who was born and raised here, graduate of the public school system, taught in the public school system, have kids now in the public school system, we know education is one of them. And we have all of these organizations, companies, businesses that are coming to the city of Philadelphia. They're all bringing jobs, not low-wage jobs, but middle market jobs that don't necessarily require a college degree. They don't require any, particular training, but you need skills in order to get into these roles. So how are we working with the school district to ensure we're creating a pipeline to all these jobs that are forecasted to come to Philadelphia, and most of them that are already here? And I even mean outside of the eds and med space. And so that's why I've been focusing so hard on career and technical education, because it could literally create a pathway to some of these new family supporting and sustaining jobs and really careers, and get individuals and young people on a path to go directly into these roles. They don't require a college degree. All you need is skills training, and you're in the role. And so that's what we have to do more of, is creating opportunity, because a lot of folks I talk to who are here in the city, and I have a lot of family all over the city in every neighborhood, it's a lack of opportunity. People feel hopeless and helpless. And so how are we doing our part? And for the individuals who are not in school, how are we creating programs to help them upskill to get into these jobs and into these opportunities? It's just so much happening in the city, and we have to ensure that, individuals who are here who want opportunity and need opportunity can get it. So that's one area I think we really need to focus on. That's why I'm harping on workforce development, career and technical education, because that is one pathway. Another pathway is, resourcing communities that have traditionally been under-resourced for a very long time. I know that, some communities don't have the same amenities as other communities, and, how we're looking at ensuring that every community has resources, not just adequate resources, but quality resources for the residents and the neighbors in that community. And I think we start there. But how do we grow middle market jobs and careers in Philadelphia? Because if you look at what's been happening, I'd say over the last 10 years, is that it's been, growth in low wage positions, and not a lot of growth in middle wage positions. And so we don't want to eliminate and lose the middle class in Philly. And one way to do that is to invest in programs that reskill, upskill, and give skills to Philadelphians so they can move into these jobs of the future that are forecasted to be here, and the jobs that are coming to Philadelphia every day.
Okay. Now, the last time I saw you, you were part of a panel of council members who were all women, who were talking about getting into the political process and some of the stuff that you have had to deal with in order to do that. Now, it's Women's History Month. And I wanted to ask you a little bit about your journey as a woman in politics, and specifically how you have managed to do that while having, your family and everything like that. And what kind of challenges, have you managed to get through, and how do you, for want of a better way to put it, what advice would you give to someone who wants to do what you do, but is looking at it and it seems like it's really kind of insurmountable?
Sure. Well, it's a great question. It's a loaded question, obviously, but what I will say is that I love helping people. That's the one thing I love to do. I simply love helping people, improving their quality of life, and doing everything I can to ensure that their circumstances are different because of my service. So how I was able to do it, I started out as an intern and a volunteer and working under former Councilwoman Blondell Reynolds Brown and really having a front row seat to her life in politics. And I think if I did not have that experience, I would not be able to sort of roll with the punches you have to roll with in this role and in this industry. And the other piece of it is just to work hard and to always be there and represent for your community and the people you serve, and never forget the community. And this is something I learned from Tasco, never forget your people. And so that's what I've tried to do, over these past years that I've been blessed to be involved with elected public service, but also just being involved as a staffer previously. And it's not easy. I have a lot of regrets some days on the work-life balance, mommy piece, because, I always wanted to be that parent that spent a whole lot of time with their kids because my mom and my dad both worked at Pennsylvania Hospital. They worked in the same department. Folks didn't know they were married because my mom carried her maiden name, and my dad obviously carried his name. And they worked together in the same department, same room for 33 years. And so it was not very often that they both could come to an event, or, it had to be a really special graduation for both of them to be there. And so that experience really stayed with me. And I wanted to be able to be that parent that could be there for everything. And that's just not possible in this role. You can't do every single event, but I do as many as I can. And I spend time with them, and we still, as much as we can, sit at the dinner table and have dinner. And we have the 7-year-old make the table, and the 5-year-old help cleans it off, and the 16-year-old is in charge of putting the food on the table. And so we try to ensure that, at least for the children, their life has a level of normalcy, and that the work that I do does not impact their life in any way. Do I wish I had more time? Sure. But I give it all that I have every single day, and then I wake up and do it again the next day. And so my advice to other women who want to be in this work and do this work is just to get to know your community, get involved, get engaged, listen to the community, and represent on their behalf. And work as hard as you can. Drown out the naysayers. Don't listen to them, because there's a lot of naysayers for women in these roles, because they'll say, oh, but she has children. Oh, but she's really young. Yeah, she's a little young. She should probably wait years. Oh, her children are young. Maybe she should wait until they grow up a little bit. And then when they grow up, they'll say, well, she has older children. So it'll never be a right time. So I'll say that to believe in yourself, have your community centered and at heart, and give it all you can every single day. Ignore the naysayers and do what you have to do to be successful. And that's what I've sought to do over the last several years, and particularly in 2019, when I was on the campaign trail, because that was difficult, because I had worked with so many people over the years, and I just automatically thought, well, everyone's going to be excited and everyone's going to be with me. And that was not the case. And that's a very harsh, hard reality to face. And it's okay, because that's when you have to have the belief in yourself, know that you can do it. And that's why my slogan was hashtag moms get the job done, because I said, no matter what, we're going to get the job done every single day. When I was on the trail, my kids were 2, 4, and 13. So it was not easy for them, and it was certainly not easy for me, but we gave it all we had every single day. And at the end of it, we were able to be successful.
Okay, well, thank you so much for your time, council member. I
Oh,
really
thank you.
appreciate it. And Larry, we appreciate it very much. And thank you for agreeing to be on Home Monitor with us. Thank you.
Yes,
Thank you very
no,
much.
thank you. It was good to see both of you, because I haven't seen you in so long. I can't wait until we get back to the days when I look over to my left and look at that box and see you all sitting in front of the box, having all your stuff plugged in.
Absolutely, council member. Yeah.
Yeah. So thank you for the opportunity, and it was good to see you both.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay.
Well, that was our interview with City Council Member Catherine Gilmore Richardson here on Hall Monitor. And we are back on WPPM 106.5. You can FM. You can also find us on social media at Hall Monitor WPPM if you'd like to check us out there. And also on our website, which I forgot the website.
Hallmonitor.org.
Hallmonitor.org. I should know that, right? And you can find all content, for Hall Monitor there, and also subscribe to our newsletter, because interviews that you see a lot of the interviews that we do here, but sometimes we don't get to show you the whole interview. But if you subscribe to our newsletter every week, you can get the whole interview for many of the interviews we've done that we haven't been able to show you all of. And Larry, you missed me sitting down with Lisa Haver today to talk about the superintendent search, what was wrong with it, what was very wrong with it, and what's next in terms of the school district. We even got into the subject of an elected school board as part of our discussion. So right now, we'd like to play our interview with Lisa Haver here on Hall Monitor. Okay, this is Hall Monitor. I'm Denise Clay Murray, and I'm here with Lisa Haver, who is a longtime education activist and part of a group of people who went to the school district last week to demand a reopening of the superintendent search, which actually they had the top 3 candidates in last week to come and talk to all of the school district's constituencies. And I'm glad that she was able to come on and join us. Thank you for joining us, Lisa.
Hi, Denise. How are you? It's good to see you.
I'm good. I'm good. So you're looking at the superintendent search. You see it's down to 3 people. What was your biggest concern with that?
Yeah, so when we went out last week, and we as the Alliance for Philadelphia Public Schools, that's a grassroots organization of teachers, parents at retired school teachers, counselors, librarians. We went out there last week after the board had announced its 3 finalists. I don't know where the number 3 came from because 10 years ago it was 2. They came out with the 3 finalists and were so inadequate. And of course, the questions that we raised and other people raised, that the principals union raised too, also, like, where are the women? Where's the local talent? We certainly have. This is a big school district. We're in a big metropolitan area. We're in the tri-state. Is there no city of Philadelphia district talent, or even regional talent? We had to go to Ohio and North Carolina and Baltimore. Why? So questions came out of there, and the choices were disturbing. And for us, because we're an advocacy organization, and what we try to do so much is to say that school districts, the governing bodies of those districts, are part of a governing system and have to be transparent. And one of the choices, Krish Mohip, had actually been chosen because he was tapped to take over the duties of a duly elected school board. That is highly problematic, because in any case, when one person by force takes over the authority of an elected board, that's called a coup. Whether it's internal, external, whether somebody tells you go ahead and do it, the voters of in this case, Youngstown, Ohio, said, this is who we want on our board. We're electing them because this is their platform. This is what we want them to do. And we had the same type of experience here. The state just decided, those people in Youngstown, the voters, what they want doesn't matter. So it's very, very troubling that Mr. Mohit ended up as one of the 3 finalists. We had issues all along with the process itself. The board proclaimed that it was a completely transparent process. We know that it wasn't, and we know that firsthand because there were more than one meeting where we were actually not allowed to come to that meeting. So the latest being after they announced the 3 finalists, again, why 3? 10 years ago when the SRC, the School Reform Commission, chose Dr. Height, their number was 2. So they had Dr. Height and another person who they said were the 2 finalists. So I don't know how 3 was decided on this time. But when they said, okay, here's our final 3, and we're going to set up meetings next week, and you can apply to come to those, the board limited that admission to people who are current students, are parents of current students, or current educators, teachers, and principals. So if you're a community member, like we are, whose children graduated from school, who retired from our positions, but are still very active in school issues, you aren't allowed to come to those. So
that also
say we need community support, and thank you for volunteering, at your neighborhood school, and by the way, you are taxpayers. But when it came down to the final days of the search, no.
Did that also include the town hall meetings that they had? Because those were supposed to be where the community could weigh in.
Well, a town hall meeting is an open meeting that all members of the public can come to. So you can call something a town hall meeting, but if you have to apply to be there, and when you apply to be there, you have to put the question in that you intend to ask, which means, we can only guess how they're doing this because it's not a transparent process. If they say, what question do you want to ask? You can rightly ask, well, if they don't like my question, are they not going to choose me? So there were a lot of problems with that. So you could be on Facebook and watch the people there, and you can watch them ask their questions, but there was no interaction. You could put a comment in that Facebook chat, but those were not considered by the board. You can only watch.
So I spoke to some folks because I covered one of the town halls, and I spoke to one of the members of the advisory committee that actually submitted suggestions to the school board, and they said there were 7 people that were one time being considered, and some of those were women, some of those were local. Did anyone know who any of these people were? And why is it that it seems like for a process that was supposed to be so transparent, a lot of people are like, I don't know what happened here?
I can only surmise, Denise, because there were so many facets of this that we were not allowed to take part in. As I said, I testified at the board in February and said, you're setting up things called town halls that aren't town halls because not everybody can come to them. You're filtering out people. And when Dr. Height came 10 years ago, and as I was saying this, Dr. Height was nodding his head. I said, we were able, it was an open meeting and anybody could come, and anybody with a question got in line. It was a pretty democratic process. Now you have to apply to be in the room, and you also have to have your question vetted in advance. That's not progress. It's ironic that the last search was conducted by the state appointed School Reform Commission, and this search is being conducted by our, allegedly locally controlled school board. And yet I'm not saying there wasn't any transparency. There were a number of meetings that people could go to, But as you came closer to the end of the process, we found more and more doors closed.
Okay. Now, do you think that that might have been a little different if the school board was itself elected by voters? Would the process have turned out a little differently?
Yes, I do, Denise. There's my short answer. Because, you know, what I pointed out in a commentary that was published in the Inquirer a couple weeks ago is that we have an appointed school board, and the school board itself is chosen in secrecy. And we've actually challenged the mayor legally on this, that we have an appointed school board. Everybody go across any city line or county line, and you will find yourself in a place where the voters of that district are allowed to choose the people who sit on the governing board of their school district. They're government officials. Our board allots, votes on spending from an annual $3.5 billion budget. They make decisions about schools, about children, about neighborhoods, about property, things that, long-term have effects on the makeup of neighborhoods and gentrification. They make very important decisions. The voters of the city should have a chance to say, I know what this person stands for, and I want that person on my school board. I mean, it's just how you vote for everybody. It's how you vote for your state senator, your state representative, the people on council, the mayor, everybody. But we in Philadelphia are disenfranchised when it comes to choosing the people on the board. And rather than make the appointment process as interactive and transparent as possible, the mayor actually, and we said, in our testimony several times in a correspondence with him, this is actually a violation of the Sunshine Act. Because when you put your nominating panel in a room and nobody can know what they're doing or how they're selecting anything, and I don't know anything about any of the people you're considering until after those names are sent to the mayor. It's like the opposite of democracy. So you have a whole basis for this district, which is rooted in secrecy.
So speaking of processes that may be judged to have been done in secret, then who do you think is going to end up being the new superintendent? And if so, will parents be able to come before the board and say either, yes, we like this person, or no, we don't like this person?
I know that a number of people and organizations have come out and said, okay, this person is the least bad of the three. Or actually, maybe I'm not trying to represent what everybody said. Some people said we weren't happy with the process and we weren't happy with the three finalists, but of them, this person is somebody we could live with. But I think it's important to remember that get caught up in these processes, and it takes on almost like a pageant, like aura, that it's like, oh, this one person's going to come in and this one person is going to make everything different and change everything. And as I pointed out in my Inquirer commentary, it's the board who makes decisions about the district. That is not just about the children and not just about the budget, but about what goes on in this city. People make decisions about where they live and how they live, often based on, well, how are the schools there? Can I send my child to this neighborhood public school? Is this a good place for my family? So what they do, is really important. They're the governing body. And, there's a piece in the Inquirer today that was saying, okay, now that we're near the end, what does a superintendent do? Just kind of a fact sheet was Henry Savage in the Inquirer. And it said, Philadelphia superintendent is responsible for it. And the very first bullet point is putting the school board's vision into action. And this is what the Alliance tries to remind people. The board is in charge, and the superintendent works for the board. And it is the board's responsibility to set its priorities for this district. So, the superintendent and his administrator, that person is really important. But let's not get caught up in the pageantry of this and wait, kind of like for the puff of white smoke to come out to say to the board, you're responsible. You have to make the decisions about how money is spent and what your priorities are. So one of our campaigns at APS is to bring back certified school librarians. Over the past 10 years, we've ended up in a place where we have, I believe it is 3, I know it's fewer than 5, certified school librarians. Why should our children not have school librarians when, again, across the city or county line and schools in the suburbs all have certified school librarians and a fully stocked library? Another vision of the board should be smaller class size. A lot of issues go back to class size, a lot. I mean, it's just, even without pouring through all the research, if a teacher has more time to spend on each individual child, that can only be a good thing for that child and for the classroom. So when the board came in 2018, they could have said, here's our 5 priorities. And one could have been smaller class size. And maybe now, 4 years later, we could have moved in that direction. We could have said, we're going to spend more money on classroom resources. And we're going to spend more money to make sure that a child is not in a kindergarten class of 30 students without an aide. Because, early in the Height administration, we lost our kindergarten aides. So the superintendent is an important person. But, APS members keep trying to remind people, we go to those board meetings every month and we research and we testify and we talk to them because they're the people in charge. We've seen too much of like the tail wagging the dog. The superintendent doesn't tell the board what to do. The board has to lay out its vision, and it's the superintendent's job to carry that vision out. So I know I didn't exactly answer your question because we were out there last week saying this is not good enough and the board should reopen its search. And we were not saying go back to the drawing board and start all over again. We were saying go back maybe just to your 10 finalists, maybe just to your 20. Just go back and look and see, is there somebody local? Is there a woman? Is there somebody who would be a better fit for the school district? And, the board didn't want to do that, or their consultants didn't want to do it, or both. I don't know. But we thought there's plenty of time. Dr. Hyde is supposed to be leaving in August, but we don't have 5 or 6 months. Another 2 weeks, maybe, that it would have taken them to go back into their final, 10 candidates and rethink that. So, they'll pick one of the 3, and we'll have to live with that decision. We're going to concentrate on saying to the board, you have, under the city's home rule charter, you have a responsibility, you have duties, and we expect you to carry them out through this superintendent.
Okay. Well, thank you so much for your time. I really appreciate it. And we'll keep an eye on this as well, because this becomes part of the budget process, because the education folks are going to have to come before city council. And I'm sure that they have some of the same questions that you did, not only about the search, but about what the board's vision is and how they're going to get the superintendent to act on that vision.
Well, that's a good point, Denise, because we've been frustrated with the lack of leadership, not just from the mayor, but from city council, which does have a say in how the district runs. It does have a say in who's on that board. We've seen very little activity in the city council's education committee. We need the city council members who will come out and make speeches and promises to actually do something, to show up at these board meetings and demand that schools and classrooms get what it is they need.
Okay, thank you.
Thanks,
and
Denise.
you're welcome. And we'll be back with more of Hall Monitor in a moment.
Okay, you are listening to Hall Monitor on WPPM 106.5 in Philadelphia, Comcast Channel 66, and streaming live at phillycam.com. You can find us on Twitter at Hall Monitor WPPM, on our website, www.hallmonitor.org, or on Facebook at PHWWPPM. Denise, thank you so much for doing that. That was really informative, and, it brings up a lot of questions.
It does. And the person that looks like the lead candidate for this job, and Lisa and I talked a little bit about this once we were done with the interview. The lead person that looks like they're going to get this job is the gentleman from North Carolina, the last person that they did the 3-day interview with. And I'm kind of wondering how he's going to do the job, because the school district that he currently runs is about the size of the school district I went to high school in. The Pemberton Township School District used to be a fairly large school district back in the 70s and 80s when Fort Dix was a full working base, and you had people coming in that were trainees and different things, and it was a fairly large school district. It is now one of the smallest school districts in South Jersey. And I'm trying to figure out how someone who comes from a school district as small as the one that I went to high school in is going to deal with a $3.5 billion budget and the issues that the school district of Philadelphia has. But one thing that that school district officials have let anyone who will listen know in no uncertain terms, they are not reopening the process. So it's going to be one of the 3 people that was interviewed last week that gets the job. And another point Lisa made that made a whole lot of sense: if people really want to make sure that their children's education is a good education, they need to stay on top of this school board, because that is where the policy comes from. And if you don't do that, what ends up happening is, the superintendent is only going to do what the board tells him to do. And if people don't understand that they have to put pressure on the board to get what they need, then basically the board can do whatever it wants. And if no one's stopping them, that's exactly what happens.
Okay, well, we have about a minute left. So what's the other big story we're keeping an eye on here?
Well, starting tomorrow, there are opening arguments in the court case of City Councilman Kenyatta Johnson and his wife, Dawn Shavu. She's a political consultant, among other things. And they are going to trial on 2 counts of honest services fraud is the big count. And for those of you who don't know what honest services fraud is, that is when you are an elected official and instead of using your position to benefit the people, you use it to make money make money for yourself. And that is what he has been accused of. An opening arguments start on that tomorrow. Next week, I will probably have like a rundown of the first few days of the trial here on Hall Monitor, and talk a little bit about the prayer service that they had for Councilman Johnson on Friday night prior to his trial beginning.
All right. Well, Denise, thank you so much. Thank you for your interviews, both interviews today. And we'll be back next week. Lance Haver will be with us, and we will have more guests and more city local government information for you here on Hall Monitor on WPPM 106.5. Have a good week.
You just have a good week, everybody.